So we're talking, I'll do intros in just a second, but we're talking Power BI source control. And I'm going to capture 3 different sort of subtopics, which we can actually see here. I'm going to talk about TMDL, TMDL. I'm going to talk about Power BI Dev Mode, and I'm going to talk about Fabric Git integration. And at least aim to give you an overview of what each of those are. We definitely don't have time to go into any details. However, I would invite questions, right? I appreciate that is probably more of a niche topic than what you were doing. So I definitely want to make sure that everyone gets something out of it. All right, but let's do introductions. Mathias Thierbach, that's my name. I'm data platform MVP, as we just discovered. I've had the great honor of actually contributing directly into Power BI, having worked with the Microsoft product team starting in September last year. That's still going on, and we're going to cover what came out of that. You may know me as the developer of PBI tools, which is actually, to some degree, the tool that sort of brought Power BI source control on the agenda. Here's my social media. One quick thing to go into, because today, actually, I had to change this slide. Before today, this line would have been different. And if you've seen previous presentations of me, you would have seen that I put myself there as working for YouGov. Today's my very last day of actually having worked for YouGov. It's a really big deal because it's I've ended a 19-year period of employment. Wow. As of tomorrow, I'm self-employed, yeah. So that is a really big deal, and I'm very grateful that you're celebrating it with me. As you can see, with the PBI bit in the company name, there is definitely something going to happen. Something's going to happen in the Power BI space with this change on my end. I can't go into any details right now, but it's super exciting, and stuff will be revealed in the next few months. Okay, cool. So that's about me. Agenda I've covered already. So let's start with a little dog, because again, as I alluded to before, Power BI source control has not been a topic, or at least has not been an official topic for way too long, right? Anyone who has cared about source control has always sort of run into walls as far as Microsoft was concerned. It looks like 2023 things have actually changed and are changing massively in that space. So that is what I want to present. Ever since April, and then again in when was built? May, I think, right? Yeah. So ever since April and May, some massive new bits and pieces were announced by Microsoft, and there's more coming later this year. So anyone who has actually cared about source control capabilities, this is the year where you can finally get happy. Right. So first thing, let's talk about who has heard about TMDL or TMDL before? Good. Just going to do a quick brief overview. So basically, TMDL is the bit I again was invited to contribute to Power BI, and it's currently in public preview. And will is still being worked on in terms of improvements and minor updates. TMDL is one really significant cornerstone of the whole source control story. it targets tabular model development, and it basically provides substantially better tooling to teams and developers who work with tabular models. So before TMDL, we had this, which is basically BIM or TMSL or TMSL. So basically a massive JSON document. And that was as far as we could go with respect to source control for models. TMDL gives us three big advantages over TMSL. First of all, it's readable. This is what TMDL looks like as opposed to JSON. Even without understanding all the nitty-gritty details, I think you can make sense of what that is, right? So we're talking about a table here called customer. We've got a partition with an M expression. Import mode is also something you recognize, right? And then we've got a bunch of columns with names and data types and so on and so forth. So that's that. But what developers need is not just to read stuff. They need to edit and produce and create and copy paste and modify things, right? So TMDL is designed to be editable, right? And particularly looking, I should probably stay closer to the microphone. Yeah, it's okay. So particularly looking at this example where we have a multi-line DAX expression for a measure. Previously, you would have been able to edit that, but it was very, very hard because converting everything to JSON pretty much means you're losing sort of the DAX view that you know from DAX Studio, for instance. In TMDL, that's no longer the case, right? If you've got a if you've got a DAX expression as part of your model, it is a DAX expression. You can copy paste it into DAX Studio and back. And then thirdly, we already saw in the beginning in the TMSL BIM world, we have one massive JSON file that can easily cover thousands and thousands of lines of JSON. That is hugely problematic for collaboration, for merging, for multiple people making multiple changes at the same time. In TMDL, by default, the entire model is broken out into smaller bits and pieces by table generally, which in and of itself is already a huge advantage. This is what we're getting as the standard folder structure. So we basically have one file for each table. We've got one file for each culture, for each role, for each perspective, and everything else sits in those ones for expressions, model, and relationships. I'm going to skip demos on that, even though I'd love to do them, as you can imagine, but just in the interest of time and pizza. I'm actually hungry. But are there any burning TMDL specific questions you may have at this point? Okay, awesome. We'll come back to it later, and we'll see sort of how it relates to the other topics. So just to, as a quick summary, TMDL is here so that source control scenarios for tabular models and ultimately CI/CD is enabled, and we get there by basically having a much better declarative format. It is fully Microsoft supported, so Microsoft shipped it. It's no longer something where we rely on some external tools. Then the other thing that is already in a public domain this is only the starting point with respect to what Microsoft is investing into. In fact, I need to mention Rui Romano, who you may well know. He's a former MVP. He joined Microsoft, I think, last year, maybe the year before. He was on the CAT team originally and actually moved over to the product team earlier this year. So he's currently the program manager for all those investments into developer-focused tooling. I worked with Rui, and I'm still working with Rui very closely because he basically manages TMDL and he manages dev mode. So all the stuff we're looking at today, he's ultimately the guy who owns it on the Microsoft side. Okay, and just because I've contrasted TMSO and TMDL a lot, TMSO is not going away. It's there to stay. It also fulfills other purposes. Not going to go into too much detail here. I'm going to skip this summary as well. You can look at that on the slides, which I'll definitely share afterwards. All right, developer mode. Again, so this is owned by Rui, and that's a real big deal. It was shipped in Power BI Desktop in June, in June. So it's only been out in public preview for about 6 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks by now. So definitely fairly new, and it's a real big deal. And that's definitely something where I want to show a demo. So if I switch over to Power BI, here we go. So I've got a so-called thick report here. So this is basically a Power BI project with a report, but also with a data model, Contoso, obviously. If I go to Save As and go into my advanced options, what is new is this. There we go. So previously you had 2 options here, PBIX and PBIT, and now there's a 3rd option, PBIP. P is project, a Power BI project, and that it looks like it may just be another file, but in fact it's not. A PBIP is actually a whole folder structure. So if I let me create a new empty folder here and just code it PBIP. And then I select PBIP down here and click Save. There we go. Right, it's done it. So I need to go to my Explorer now, which well, lost. Here we go. Yeah, here you're hiding. Right. There we go. So that's what I want. So this is what was just created. Is it big enough? Maybe better like that. So I do in fact have a PBIP file. Oops, sorry. I do in fact have a PBIP file, but then I also have a couple of subfolders. So why don't we have a look at what's inside them? If I just open that up with VS Code, and may have to bump up the font size a little bit. There we go.
Available today in the preview. So if you go to preview in Power BI options, you can turn on over here. It's called Power BI Project Save option.
Yeah, and exactly. Options here. Here we go. Let me show. Right, preview features, and it's this one down here. Yeah. Make sure it's disabled by default, but it's a one-off. So, and it doesn't interfere with anything else. It's just giving you an additional choice. It's not that somehow you're locking yourself into a preview feature that may or may not be working. Okay. So this PBIP file actually is JSON. I mean, Power BI loves JSON, right? There's a lot of JSON around. And why not? So this is basically just a pointer, and in fact, it points to this particular subfolder, which is called contoso.report. And then that one basically contains my report definition. We have a PBIR file here. So this is Power BI report, which itself is yet another pointer. And it basically gives us a reference to the data model. And there are two options here. We can have a by path data reference, or we can have a by connection reference. By path means we have a relative path, which happens to be that one, and that basically makes it a thick report. If I had a by connection, then I would have a reference to a data set in a Power BI workspace. That would make it a thin report. And as you can see, those are very simple JSON files, right? So what is intended ultimately is that you actually or use some tooling or come up with some tooling, to potentially modify those bits and for instance, swap a thick report into a thin report, which previously lots of people struggled with because it was not nicely supported. Then there are lots of files here which contain metadata, but the real gist of what we actually care about is contained in two specific files. So first of all, we've got report.json. That contains all the report pages and visuals and filters and bookmarks and report level measures. So everything that's sort of report specific. And that's one single file that is fairly complex and not really meant to be read. And then on the model side, same thing. We've got one single file, model.bim, where the same, that's TIMSO, right? We looked at that before. So we can already see there's a huge step forward in terms of actually having this capability where we no longer just have a single binary PBIX file that is a black box, and where we actually get stuff that we can look at as developers. But we're still quite limited in terms of, what that actually gives us and what you would want to do as a developer, right? So all the nice stuff I was showing you around TMDL earlier is not available here, right? So we're still stuck with TMDL. I'm saying that not to talk anything down, but just to make you aware that this is a journey, right? It's absolutely the full intention of the product team and Rui in particular to bring those advantages of, for instance, TMDL into developer mode. And ultimately, this model.bim file will no longer be here, and instead we will have a TMDL subfolder. And the same applies to a report. But it's a journey which the product team is working on with very high priority. It's just taking some time. So we need to appreciate that stuff is moving in the right direction, but we're definitely not where we're getting the full benefits. Any questions regarding dev mode?
So in theory, you just showed that project in there, and I know Rui's talked about this. You can obviously reference from reports multiple data sets within that project in theory now, can't you? So you could have multiple reports,
yes,
in that folder pointing to one data set.
Correct. Yes. I mean, you could actually go in here and clone this entire thing, right? And call that one report 2, right? Like so. That shows up here. And again, it has a relative reference to the same data set, and I could open this one up, right? If you did want to do that, there's one thing you got to be very much aware of, which is this. there's a GUI, which is called logical ID. If you were to publish this into a workspace, you better make sure that that GUI is unique. Obviously, what I've done right now by just cloning it, it's no longer unique. That would be a problem if you wanted to publish it. That is documented, but obviously it's a bit of a hassle. I think they're looking into ultimately handling that automatically. But yeah, other than that, that's definitely a scenario, right? I mean, just to understand, you know, sort of the big change here, right? We're now dealing basically with folder structures that contain sort of well-defined, structured files with data in them, as opposed to a PBIX file where no one knows what's inside unless you use PBI tools, right? So I mean, that really is a big deal, but we'll have to wait a few more months, you know, to really get the full benefits from that.
Tabular Editor has a save to files option.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that different to this? What's the differences between those two?
Well, okay, yeah, good question. Very good question, actually. So let me go back here. So Tabular Editor obviously is model only, right? So it doesn't do anything with respect to reports. And I did show earlier the full TMDL folder structure, right? So this is what you get if you're using TMDL, where we basically have one file per table, et cetera, et cetera. That was heavily influenced by what Tabular Editor had done previously with save to folder, right? Which is basically the exact same idea. But the big difference is, first of all, Tabular Editor just uses JSON because it takes the BIM and breaks it out, right? So you don't get any of the benefits in terms of readability and editability. And secondly, it's Tabular Editor only, right? If you're using Tabular Editor save to folder, you're locked into Tabular Editor workflows, whereas this is shipped by Microsoft, and any tool out there, and ultimately even Power BI Desktop will support that, right? Tabular Editor today also supports TMDL, right? So maybe that's the one thing I could show. I have, here we go. Got Tabular Editor open. I still have my Power BI project open. So what I can do is I can actually open that from my local instance. There we go. So I'm connecting to the Contoso model that's currently running in Power BI Desktop, right? Got all my tables here and whatnot. And what I've done in Tabular Editor preferences on the serialization tab, ever since version 2.18, I'm using 2.19 here, but ever since version 2.18, which came out back in April, you can choose. You can choose what the save to folder option gives you. If you want the legacy Tabular Editor specific format, you go for database.json. If you want to have the Microsoft supported TMDL preview, in this case, you pick that one. And so I've got that, which means if I now go and this, okay, right. Why wouldn't you? Oh, Daniel. Seriously?
DBT's a Mac.
If I, oh, right, okay, I'll open a new instance.
Save each measure as its own JSON file, right?
Yeah.
Is it the same thing with TMDL?
No. So let me start that was a good one. Weird. Okay, cool. We're back to where we need to be. So cool. I'm doing save to folder now, right? And I'm going to my this is where I live today. Here we go. Creating a new empty subfolder, call it TMDL, and done, right? it's sadly uneventful because it actually does a lot of stuff. It just doesn't tell you. All right, so let's look at this in VS Code. Here we go. All right, so this is what we just created. That is the save to folder TMDL version. And what we're getting with respect to measures is that measures are basically embedded with their respective table, right? So that's a decision we made in terms of the default output format, right? In Tabular Editor, you have some choices. You can actually select whether or not you want them as separate files. But here, the product team basically made a decision to say you're getting a particular folder structure by default. And at this point, sadly, even though I very much opted against that, but at this point, you have no way of modifying that. So this is what you're getting. But it does make sense. I'm not saying it's a bad decision. It's just, you know, you don't have any customization abilities. And so that's what you're getting, right? TMDL guarantees that each time you're exporting the same model, it will always come out in the same order, which means if you it's designed to not give you any merge conflicts as much as possible, right? You will always have sales quantity before margin before sales amount in this particular case, just because this model has them defined in that particular order.
So if you wanted to reuse this across multiple data sets,
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to have a library of your measures across your organization, you just use these files across.
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, I actually do that frequently. The other day, I wanted I wanted to add a field parameter to this model for demo purposes. And you probably know a field parameter is basically a model table, right? So I went to another model where I had field parameter defined and just copied the respective TMDL file across, and that was it. So that's the you know, that's the brave new world. That's something we can all look forward to. And those sort of copy paste scenarios are something which I know Rui in particular is very, very keen on, and he definitely always pushes those scenarios. How are we doing time-wise?
15 minutes.
Yeah, very good. But I mean, I like some interactivity, so it's useful. Let's. I've got a lot of sort of reading material relating to dev mode here, which I don't have to read out to you. You can look at that offline. The important bits I pointed out already. So for instance, here, I did a little inventory of all the various files that actually exist. And I bolded the two files that are ultimately interesting, right? Everything else is sort of metadata and a little bit of noise, but model.bim defines the entire data model, report.json defines the entire report with everything that relates to the visual side of reports. So we've got that here, and since we've seen that virtually, yeah, not virtually, but actually every single file in here is a JSON file. One thing that's also happened as part of the dev mode preview, we have JSON schemas published, and that means the actual internal structure for every single one of those files is documented we get JSON schemas which integrate with tooling of your choice. For instance, VS Code. And we can see that there's a real commitment suddenly, after so many years from the product team to address those developer needs and requirements. So if you click on the link up there, that's just a shortcut. You'll actually get to a page on GitHub, which happens to contain those schemas. And again, they come from Microsoft. It's not that this is something I came up with. Yeah, so this is something I copied from Microsoft documentation. Again, not some stuff I invented. So TMDL is coming to dev mode very, very soon. I know it happens to be one of the top priorities for the team right now. And then the next big thing is going to be around reports and actually taking the report.json file that is currently rather inaccessible and sort of giving that some love and attention. And then they're also working on some new REST APIs, which ship as part of the Fabric APIs for deployment, so that you can actually take a PBIP folder structure and ultimately deploy that. So this is all great stuff. And I mean, to be honest with you, virtually all of this PBI tools has always given you, but I'm still super excited about it because ultimately we want this to come from Microsoft, obviously. Okay, so let's take the next step and look how that integrates with Fabric. So down here is pretty much the where we're at as far as dev mode is concerned, right? So Power BI Desktop allows us to pretty much extract everything into a folder structure, which consists mostly of JSON files. We even get a default git ignore file generated with just the right settings in it. And that allows us to integrate with Git. We can track changes and commit them very nicely. And ultimately, we can push that repo into a CI server. Fabric workspaces actually integrate with Git servers, currently only with Azure DevOps, so not GitHub or anything else. But again, that's just a temporary limitation, part of preview. And this is actually how we can close the loop. So before I do too much theory here, let me actually show you, because this stuff is it's much more impressive if you see it in action. I just need to find my Edge instance. Here we go. Cool. So this is a repo I happen to have in Azure DevOps. And you probably recognize this, right? It's effectively what we get from Power BI Dev Mode, right? It's the exact same thing. I created that by doing save as PBIP from desktop and then pretty much pushed it up here. So what Fabric allows me to do is, and in fact, I'm gonna start from scratch. So what's this called? PBIMCR, right? So let me create a brand new workspace. And you can, so that will work with either PPU or with Fabric or with as in F or with P, right? It will not work with Pro, I believe. But PPU is all right. So here we go. So I've got a new PPU workspace, and that one, if I go to workspace settings, has this thing, which is super exciting. We have a dedicated Git integration setting there. And again, that is available today, right? All you need is a Fabric or premium-like workspace. And you can just basically click through here. So this is my Azure DevOps org. I'm selecting a project now, and I'm selecting a repository, and ultimately I'm selecting a branch. There's only one here. And so those settings, so org, project, repo, branch, that is exactly what we just looked at in the other tab, right? And what happens now when I click connect and sync? Remember, we just created a brand new, completely empty workspace. It's going to basically pull the sources from that repo. Here we go. Stuff is happening, right? It's spinning. It's going to pull that across, and it's actually going to generate those artifacts. And in this particular case, it's going to be a report and a data set. And look at that. That was pretty fast, right? So yeah. So right, that is pretty impressive, I'd say. So again, right, this is what we started from, just sort of a bunch of Git JSON files, and with a few clicks, I got to this view where I'm actually getting a report generated. Now, there's one issue here, as you may have guessed. So it doesn't quite work quite yet, but there's a very simple explanation for that. Obviously, I've got a data set this report is connected to, but the data set hasn't been refreshed, right? And so I'm getting error messages here because it's an empty data set. So that is something which at this point I still need to do manually. So if I go back to my workspace and I think I need to set credentials. That's the other thing which we're not getting free, unfortunately. Here we go. Skip. That should do very good. Okay, so now I can refresh. That's obviously a demo data set, so that normally just takes a few seconds to refresh. Here we go. I've got a spinner. Correct, but you still need to figure out how to refresh, whether to refresh and how to, right? Obviously, you can put a schedule on it, or you can link that to an additional action in your pipeline or so. So if I go back to my report now, all will be good. So there we go. Cool. Right. So that's it. Right. So that's the idea. And it goes further than that, because it's actually a two-way integration. So this is not just for me to sort of bring artifact definitions into workspaces. I can now do something which in the past would always have been very problematic. I can actually go into a report in my in the browser in my workspace and actually make changes there and still get change tracking via Git. So if I go to edit, previously that would have been problematic because you would have broken sort of the linkage to your original master PBIX file. So if I give this one a border, just so we have something that is a visual. Yeah, no, here, that's the one. That's what I wanted. Is that it already? Yeah, there we go. Cool. So if I save that and go back to my workspace, look at that. It has detected that I'm no longer in sync with my underlying repository. And it actually guides me through the process very nicely, right? It works much better on a big screen, right? So this looks a bit weird because obviously, in fact, it's not just weird, it's actually Yeah, that's better. There we go. So it tells me where I've had changes and pretty much gives me a very nice UI where I can put a commit message. So edit border around what's it called? Matrix.
Can you see the code changes?
Well, not here. But obviously, once I commit it, I'll see it in DevOps, which I'll show you in a second. There we go. All right. And now we're back to green, and we no longer have any pending changes. And if I now switch to the other tab and look at history, here we go. I've got right. So this is pretty cool stuff. This is now me having done an edit in the browser on my report, and stuff actually came back to my repo. And if I click here now, look at that. Now this does give me the div. Now the problem is, right, this is the piece that the team still needs to resolve and really needs to deliver. Look at that, right? So you can't really make sense of that, right? This is not as nice as what we have with TMDL or even BIM, to be honest, for models. There's quite a bit of work to be done for us to get similar diffability and readability of report definitions. But yeah, so it's just a matter of months at this point. And just thinking of pizza, that was pretty much the gist of Fabric Git integration, how it relates to dev mode. We covered how dev mode relates to TMDL. We've seen what the current limitations are. Also, yes, so this is called Fabric Git integration, but at this point, you were showing us all the bells and whistles Fabric is giving us. Git integration only relates to reports and data sets, nothing else yet, right? So this is a very early preview. Ultimately, all the other bits and pieces are coming, but we're just not there yet. And I'm going to skip that. Lots of references here relating to the three topics. Again, you can look at that offline.